Hey everybody, welcome to the Lutherist Podcast. I'm Paul Rhoney.
I'm Jason Rodgers.
And this is part 2 of our 2-week-long electronics Q&A show. We sure had a lot to talk about on this one.
It's a deep topic.
This one, we couldn't have done it without our listeners. I mean, everybody sent in these great questions. I don't know that I don't think we're answering all of them necessarily, but hopefully we are covering enough of these topics that if you don't hear your name on the show, hopefully your question still gets answered.
Yeah.
I think that's what we're shooting for here. You know, we kind of pick and pulled some of the best questions to cover the most area.
And as some of those questions start popping up on the social medias and the email inbox, we start to kind of group them, cluster them into some relevant and some cohesive topics. So last week you heard us talking about just wiring schemes in general. You also heard us talking about tone capacitors and tone pots.
Yep.
And this week we're going to be continuing discussion about pickups and pickup winding, which is something that is near and dear to my heart.
Absolutely. So buckle up. It's a good one.
Here we go.
So we have some questions about winding pickups. Now, Jason, I don't know about you, but I don't personally think of myself as a pickup winder, which is like a pickup maker rather.
Yeah.
Like I have made lots of pickups, but it's like because my understanding is so limited, you know, in terms of just what exactly is the effect of a different wire gauge, you know, like because my knowledge in that way is so limited. I'm not an expert, and I don't feel like I'm a pickup maker. But you're very much a pickup maker. Like, have you ever thought about even selling your pickups to other people? Like, where are you at on that? You know what I mean? Like,
It's a funny thing because, you know, I did start winding on my very first guitar, and it was because I was doing a multi-scale 7-string, and I was thinking, okay, so I want to do 7-string, so that's going to be more expensive if I was going to buy them, you know, commercially available. And I want to angle it with the multi-scale, so that's going to probably be more expensive. And so I went down that rabbit hole right away. And even though I wind pickups for every instrument, I don't know. I see it as being kind of part of the entire build. I've been asked about winding pickups. And you know, I've had a couple of people ask me about that at shows and stuff like that, and they've taken my business card. I've never got any calls from it. I have wound a set of pickups for our friend John Songson. But I don't know if I would. I don't know if I want to. Wind pickups, because it really, when it comes to winding pickups, it's something that it is time consuming. I mean, at least is for me. I mean, when I'm doing like a run of pickups, I can get faster and get more accurate with some things as I'm like doing a batch. But I don't know. This last summer, I spent 3 days winding pickups, just pickups, you know, like put everything else aside and wound pickups. You know, wound them, you know, soldered them up, potted them, all that kind of stuff. And in that 3 days, it was about halfway through that, I'm like, you know what? I don't want to make pickups available, and it's because it's time consuming. It's you know, I find it fun to do it for my own guitars, but I don't know if I'd want to just crank them out like that all day. I mean, we've got so many people who are doing it better. I mean, we've just got, you know, Ken at Roadhouse, just in the neighborhood here. Who's making some fantastic pickups. You know, headed north a little bit farther, we've got Luller pickups. We got TV Jones. It's just like, I really can't compete with those products and those people with decades of experience, and probably shouldn't either. But it's definitely something that I like to do as part of the overall kind of custom package that I offer. But yeah, it's for folks who want to sell them, it should probably be something that you do full time, just
Yeah.
so that you get like a lot of iterations under your belt, and you really get to know your own results, your own products when you do things like, change a wire gauge or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get into some of these questions.
Okay.
So Troy Walker asks, what are the most important parts to pickup winding? It's a black hole of info. So basically, what should I focus on first?
Well, yeah, there's a lot out there, and there's a lot of mythology that you have to wade through as well. So the basic science of how a pickup works is pretty simple and straightforward, and I think for me it was really important early on to understand why a pickup does what it does and how it does what it does. And so when I'm explaining it to people, I like to set this up. I say, do you know how an electric motor works? And a lot of times people do. And so what do you have in an electric motor? You've got a coil, some kind of coil. You've got magnets, and you have motion, and you have electricity. So in an electric motor, so think of like the simplest like brush motor, like that you might find in like a toy or like a slot car or something like that, right? So you've got that internal arbor that is wound with a coil and is attached to your gear or whatever is powering it, right? You've got the magnets on the outside, and you run an electric current through that coil in the arbor, and it creates this electromagnet, which creates this whole like repelling and attracting kind of process that moves very fast, and that's what spins the motor. So there you go. So you've got coil, you got magnet, you've got motion, you've got electricity. Look at another thing that's called a generator. So it's the same thing, but you kind of rearrange all of those components. You've got your coil that's attached, this time is attached to a generators that have the magnets in the inside. I can't remember which way. I think it's probably do it both ways. But you've got some sort of motion that's provided by an outside source. So if you've got like a backup generator, it's a 5 horsepower Briggs and Stratton gasoline motor. In the Northwest, we like our power to come clean from air and from water. So we've got dams and we've got big windmills out in the gorge. In other parts of the world, it's coal power. We've got, if you're from Iceland, it's coming from geothermal. If you're in Europe, you've got nuclear power. So you've got some sort of energy that creates this motion, this turbine, right? And so you've got motion inside a magnetic field, which creates an electric current. So you got motion creating electricity in a generator. In a motor, you've got electricity creating motion, right? So a pickup is kind of like a generator. So you've got your coil, that's your coil around your bobbin. You've got your magnets, and we've got different types of magnets that we use. The motion comes from the strings action above the coil and the magnets. That creates this disturbance of it in the magnetic field, which creates a current, and that is your signal in your coils. But we're talking about on the order of like millivolts, very, very small. That's why you have an amplifier to pump up that to amplify that electric signal.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it was Michael Faraday that discovered this principle, right?
I'm not sure. I just recently read a biography of Nikola Tesla, and it's like there's all this was in there, and I don't remember, but it might be Faraday. It's all electromagnetics and that idea of moving a magnet through a coil through a magnetic field, or a magnetic field through a coil. It generates power in different ways. So once you understand the physics of a pickup, it's really interesting and very kind of simple. And when you look at all the various types of pickup designs, you realize there's a lot of ways to do that. And when you take that coil and the magnet, um, they're in different places. The strings are always in the same place. That motion is always the same. But where the coil and where the magnets are different in different designs. And so, what are the most important parts? Well, it's the coil and the magnet. That's what your pickup is. The string is providing the motion and moving through the magnetic field to create the signal. And everything else is just sort of fine tuning to get the sound that you want, or to get a sound at all. But when it comes to like diving into your own pickup winding, you should probably at first maybe focus on one style. Like, are you going to do a single coil or a humbucker style? And winding a bobbin, really, it's better if it's a neat and even wind, but it's not important.
That's such an interesting
yeah, it's on there are a lot of there's a lot of opinions on how the wind pattern affects tone, and whether you're doing a very, very consistent and very even pattern that can only be brought by a computerized winder, where you're like literally laying down one strand of wire next to the other strand. If you're thinking about like a spool of like sewing thread, and how each of those it's really hard once you like unspool a little bit to wind it back on to make it neat, right? You get that spool and it's perfect, right? And as soon as you take some off and you wind back the extra, it's all sloppy on there and it builds up in kind of crisscrossy ways. There are effects of that, and also can affect how much wire you're able to fit on a bobbin. If it's all crisscrossy, it's bulky, and it's going to fill up really fast. If it's all perfectly laid down, you're going to be able to fit more on there. So if you're winding, you probably want to do that as evenly as possible at first, and then one of the main ways that pickup recipes are altered is like let's just say you're using one wire type, 42 gauge, 42 AWG. Putting more wire or less wire on there is going to give you some fairly dramatic results right away. Also, swapping out magnet types is a way to get a dramatic change in tone, just because different magnet strengths and different magnet types throw out their magnetic field, their flux path different ways. So if you wanted to just do some simple experiments with things, you could let's say you're going to wind a single Strat coil, and you wind it to what's considered sort of average, 10,000 turns on it. You put a little more on, put a little less on, and do some A/B comparisons. Strat coils, they've got the magnets in the pole pieces themselves, so it's not really easy to swap out magnets with that. You'd have to do several iterations, to do like Alnico 2 versus Alnico 5 versus Alnico 8 or something like that. With a humbucker, you can do a little bit more of that, a little bit easier, with the swapping out the magnets, because that's not destructive to the bobbin itself. The magnet's usually loaded underneath, in between the coils, so you can pretty quickly pull out magnets and stick another bar magnet in there. So really just kind of focusing in your early winding experiences on wire count, so turns count and magnet type is a really good place to start. And you're going to find that if you go on some of the bigger manufacturing websites like Seymour Duncan or DiMarzio or something like that, and you look through all of the specs, they give you two pieces of information that can really give you some clues about what they're doing. One of them is the magnet type. They almost always report the magnet type. And the other is the DC resistance. And even though that sometimes is misleading, depending on the size of the size of the pickup, 6-string versus 7-string versus 8-string, or the wire diameter. A smaller wire diameter is going to give you a higher resistance. So you can't always get, unless they actually tell you what kind of wire they wind on there. Seymour Duncan, I think, does tell you whether they're using a poly or an enamel wire.
Right.
But you can kind of reverse engineer a pickup based on that DCR. There's a not really sure. Let's just assume that we're going to be putting this on the podcast description, a link. But there's an online coil calculator, and it gives you can go in and select in a drop down menu different bobbin sizes for the core size and the space between the flats. And you can also put in your own parameters as well, and then you can enter a DC resistance, and then it calculates based on the resistance per foot and the actual travel around a bobbin. If you wound 5,000 turns, it does all that math for you, the resistance per foot and how many times around a bobbin is going to get you a foot. But you're able to reverse engineer a pickup a little bit and it gives you some possible wind counts. So you get your bobbin size, your target DC resistance, and it gives you some possible wind counts that might result from that. And it gives you, I think, 4 different ones. And it's called from tight machine, loose machine, tight hand, loose hand. So in other words, if you're doing it by machine or you're doing it by hand, loose and tight is how much tension you're putting on the wire as it's going on. That's an important thing.
It is, for sure.
Because a looser tension is going to result in more wire being on there. Tighter tension is going to be more efficient wind. Of course, if you go too tight, you also start stretching the wire, which increases the resistance, which kind of throws off your counts and stuff like that in your overall results. But it's possible to do some sort of reverse engineering of some pickups like that, and only focusing on wind count and magnet type. So like I was saying, you go on those manufacturer websites and you start looking through all the specs, and you find out that most of what they're doing to change the resulting tone and the product is they're changing wind counts and they're changing magnet types. And sometimes you find that 2 pickups have the exact same resistance but have a different magnet type. And that's a different product. So just right there, you can create a whole set of parameters. Let's say you're winding, to a humbucker to, typical specs, 5,000 counts per coil. You've got one product that has Alnico 2. You got one product that has Alnico 5. You got another product that has ceramic 8. And you can label those as different things, and you're going to hear different things out of those pickups. Or you could take one magnet type and go, all right, so I'm going to do, 4,500 counts per coil. I'm going to do 5,000 counts per coil. I'm going to do 5,500 counts per coil. And each one of those pickups is going to have some subtle differences, all with the same magnet type. So that's where you can start with your experimentation.
Yeah, that's great. I can definitely speak to that. Like I've had my early pickup winding experience was just real cheap on a lathe, totally by hand, super scattered coil, so it was very bulky, very few winds, and that was just a real hairy sounding pickup, like just kind of like insane. But the tighter you get it, the closer you get it, the more machine-like consistency that you get it, the more focused the sound is. And so, but what is the most important thing with pickup winding? everything is the most important thing. There's kind of not one particular thing that is like, because every little element that you include, wire gauge, magnet type, and the size of the coil, even the shape of the magnet, all these things, all of them come together to make the pickup, and come together to all of them can be varied to change the tone. So, what is the most basic thing you should focus on? I would say the most basic thing you should focus on is research. Knowing what if you change this, what's going to happen, and B, getting the kind of coil that you want to get. Because if you want that loose scatter wound coil that's real hairy sounding, like if that's your tone, if that's your thing, figure out how to do that, and figure out how to do it consistently.
Right.
And if you want that tight focused sound that's just very, it's more hi-fi, I guess would be a good way to put it. Focus on building your machine, or get one of those CNC winders or whatever. But focus on that and figure out how you're going to get the kind of coil that you want to get, because you could, in theory, only ever know how to wind one type of coil,
right,
and then just vary the wire and the magnets to Land's End, and you can come up with a whole family of pickups just on that one coil. So that's probably how I would summarize all of that.
Yeah. And speaking of the winders that you use, we've got a question from the Luthiers Facebook page from Ted Jackal. He's asking about DIY winders. He says, what are some of the options short of investing heavily in machines? I've heard of converted sewing machines. Any other options you've liked? How about options for counting windings on a DIY setup? And so you said you used a lathe. Yeah, describe that a little bit more.
Okay, so this is real early in my career, and I wanted to make reproductions of the Fender wide range humbucker, which nobody was doing at the time. Now you can buy. There's plenty of places that make those, but nobody was doing it when I wanted to do it. And so, I did a lot of research in terms of magnets and all this other stuff. I ended up making this insane pickup that, to the best of my knowledge, there's still nobody has ever made another pickup with that particular magnet material. But that's a whole other story. But anyway, this lathe was, I think, the cheapest lathe that you could buy from Grizzly at the time. I mean, it was like $200. Yeah. It's a big machine. I mean, it's a woodworking lathe. It's not, But the nice thing was it had a variable speed. So it just had, on-off switch and one knob, so you could start it slow and then just crank it up once you start to get the thing going.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so, I just kind of made custom little cups to sort of, and little holders to hold the pickup centered on the thing. And it had, the clamp that comes in on the other side to hold it from that end. And mounted a magnet on the back side of the main plate, and then there was this little digital counter that would count off one every time a magnet passed by, one side of it.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't know where you get those things. I didn't buy it. There was this other dude that was helping me out, and he figured out how to do this. But yeah, so it was kind of completely wireless, so to speak. And the magnet would spin around, and it would count off one. And so that's how you keep track of the coils. But I didn't have any kind of a fancy holder for like holding the wire and keeping it to tension. I was literally just standing there with my hand trying not to break it.
Yep.
Which is a crazy way to do it. I later got the Lawler book and saw just that fantastically simple little setup for the felt with the washer and the wing nut, for kind of holding it. And then on their version, of course, it's a modified sewing machine, which, and then the fishing reel thing, I think, too, maybe. But, and it's to sort of guide it back and forth. And I know that's what you did with your homemade deal.
Yeah, because I got the Lola book, and we're talking about, this is sort of the original Bible in terms of like DIY winding. And Jason Lawler wrote it. It's called Basic Pickup Winding and Complete Guide to Making Your Own Pickup Winder. It's a book that kind of goes in and out of print. I got it during this one little window of time when he was still selling it, and so I don't know if they're still printing it. You can find them on eBay and stuff like that, actually for some ridiculous prices. But it was actually a little. I think it was you know how oscillating fans go back and forth?
Mm-hmm.
It's something like that. It's like a small motor, and it's what's known as a heart-shaped cam. And so the this, the wire guide is on like a little spring-loaded rod, and there's a heart-shaped cam that comes around and guides that little rod.
Hmm.
So it's this rotary motion on a heart-shaped cam that makes this linear motion on the little rod. But yeah, that's the way he started out his business, with this very lo-fi kind of thing. And yeah, mine uses a fishing reel, and it's the type of fishing reel that's it's kind of one of those vertical ones that's got the bobbin that goes up and down, and then it's got the bail that wraps the fishing line around it. But yeah, so it's the same thing basically. There's like this little cam inside the fishing reel, so that when you're winding it with the handle, it's got that rotary motion that presses on a little spring-loaded linear post that moves it up and down. So yeah, it's the same kind of idea there. Yeah. But yeah, when I first started winding, my very very first coil that I wound is I actually went over to it was the first time I met John Songson. Went over to his shop, and he had gotten a StewMac kit, and he he took his wife's sewing machine, put a piece of double stick tape on the little end whatever that pulley that knob is on the side, that advancing, and stuck the bobbin on there, put the pedal on the floor and went and it just wound it by hand. He's like, "Here, try it out." And I'm like, oh my god, and I knew right away that I was going to need to do something a little bit more stable, because it was really hard to get that bobbin on there completely vertical so that it didn't wobble in a funny way, and completely centered. So it turned out that my wife was getting a new sewing machine, because an older one had died. Something in the guts died, and a little needle didn't go up and down anymore. So she was going to toss it. So I said, "Can I have this, please?" And of course her answer is, "As long as it stays in the shop." That's the answer for a lot of things, as long as you keep it in the shop. So I parted it out, and I used a lot of parts. Obviously the motor, the speed control, used a lot of the other kind of the machine, fine machine rods, very straight rods, and other sort of collar stays and clamps and things like that. To build my own. You can, if listeners, if you're really interested in seeing what my winder looks like, you can find that on my Facebook page, JMR Guitars. I think I still have an album that's there that shows the whole thing, and it shows in action. But you don't need something that's super high tech. You just need to be able to hold that bobbin on the end of a spinning platen. On the MIMF, there's a guy from Finland named Markku Night. I'm going to say his last name wrong. Naitaja. It's spelled Nyyytaja. He's from Helsinki, and he builds some cool guitars. He does his pickup winding on a power drill, and he's got this clamp that holds the power drill down. He's got this little platen that holds the bobbin on the end, and he guides it by hand. Everything is hand guided and finger tension. And I think he's just winding those pickups until they're full. He doesn't have any kind of counter on that, which is actually kind of how some of the original pickups were done, on the PAFs and stuff like that. Those machines wound until they were full, and on those early designs. But I also had a magnet triggered counter. I have a magnet triggered counter on my pickup winder. And it's just a $10 digital. I think it goes up to 6 digits. It's just a really very inexpensive Chinese digital counter, And it's triggered very simply. It's just like anytime just the contact touches, it counts one. And so what I did was, and I don't know if you did on yours, but I have a reed switch, and the reed switch is this little tube. It's got two contacts in it. It's a vacuum tube, so it looks kind of like a fuse or a light bulb almost, and it's got two little contacts inside there that and it's vacuum sealed, so those contacts don't corrode over time. And you just every time a magnet goes past it, those two little contacts go tick tick tick.
Okay.
And at low RPMs, it's not a big deal. If you were doing something in an industrial setting where you were doing like tens of thousands of RPMs, it would be too fast for a mechanical counter like that. You get what's called bounce. So instead of it clicking once, it sometimes counts multiple or not at all. And so then you would go to an optical sensor for that. And I don't know how an optical sensor works. I just know that on your disc as it's spinning, you've got I can't remember if it's a reflective spot or if it's just like a non-reflective spot. It's like a dark disc with a single open. I can't remember how it works. But again, there's like it's a light sensing thing that counts every time, and those are much more accurate at high RPMs. But I've even seen like, for example, local guy Trevor Chase, Coconut Monkey Electronics. He does a hand cranked winder. I'm not exactly sure how he put this all together, but it's on this little piece of plywood, and it's got this hand crank on it. Almost looks like the hand crank on like an old pencil sharpener or something like that. It's got some various gears and things, and a platen that spins it. He's got a little wire guide, and it just has a little mechanical counter on there that just kind of rolls over, like an odometer or something like that. So I mean, you can go as high tech or as low tech as you want. If you did want to upgrade to an actual commercial model, StewMac and Mojotone, I think they sell some of the same winders.
That Shatner winder, I think.
Yeah, those have integrated digital counters on them. I think those might be an optical counter in those. Those are like $400 to $500. You're still hand feeding the wire, so you come up with your own tensioner and hand guiding it by eye. There's also, if you want to completely do it by machine, there's a company called CNC Design Limited in the UK. They sell a programmable one. I think the conversion right now is $900 US. So definitely, I mean, my pickup winder was, I think I spent probably less than $50 in the whole thing with spare parts and just wood that I had on hand. So you can go as simple or as complex as you want on that.
Yeah, and that CNC Design Limited CNC pickup winder that you mentioned, I've actually used one of those. That's what we had at Veritas. And if I'm not mistaken, this is I guess hearsay, but I'm fairly sure it's the same one that Anderson Guitars uses. So yeah, I mean, I have like firsthand experience using one of those machines. They're really great. They actually come with like software to run it that is it's very user-friendly software where you can kind of just type in the width of the bobbin, type in the number of winds. Really, really easy machine to use. You do have to supply your own tensioner, but it will do the guiding for you.
And cool. I remember reading up on those a little bit. That interface, I think it's just a USB connection to a laptop or something, right? You can do that. Yep. And the software is really, really simple. And I think one of the, aside from the parameters of traverse, width on the guide there, you can also dial in things like what's known as TPL, the turns per layer. And that is another thing that's another, when it comes to winding pickups, that's another detail that people see as a variable that you can change.
Mm-hmm.
And so more so TPL turns per layer, more layers per pass. That means that you're stacking up the wires closer, each pass right next to each other. Um, and there's probably a mathematical, perfect wind for your bobbin height. Um, but then as you go to a lower TPL, that means that the wire is going across there and crisscrossing more. So you're going to get that slightly thicker, bunchier, fatter
Mm-hmm.
coil stack.
Mm-hmm.
Some people see that as part of their recipe.
Yeah.
I even saw when I was researching early on, pickup winding. I can't remember who it was on YouTube. There's a guy who he's got, I think it's one of the Shatton winders, and he's doing all of his tensioning and guiding by hand, and he was doing this combination of very controlled layers and then a scatter layer. So he'd go,
Mm.
like wind, 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 whip it around, whip it around, whip it around, whip it around, wind, 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 wind.
Right.
And
Right.
so every now and again, every I don't know how many passes through, there would be this random scattery wind inside there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and again, that for whatever reason he was doing that. That was
Mm-hmm.
part of his recipe, and that was part of his fine tuning
Yep.
of tone.
Yep.
Um, so that's all interesting stuff. Um, that this also gets back to that question of what is a hand wound pickup. Do you so my winder now, it does have a tensioner, and it does have a mechanical automated traverse. So can I no longer call my pickups hand wound?
Yeah, well, you flip a
You
switch,
know?
turn it on, and it goes. It's like, yeah,
Yeah,
it's, no
yeah.
matter no
So
matter how homemade the machine might be, it's your hand's not touching it. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. That's for another time. Moving on. Ted Jackal again asks about pickup parts. Opinions on kits that are available. Is there a style of pickup that is particularly easier or harder to start with?
The kits, the stuff that's available through StewMac and Mojo Tone, I think they're pretty good quality.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about
I would agree.
if you're talking about the humbucker kit or something like that, you've got uh, two plastic bobbins, you've got the various slugs and the screws and the keepers, and you've got you can choose what kind of magnet you want with it. Um, you get a nickel silver base plate. Um,
Yeah.
I think that they're very very quality.
Mm-hmm.
They also sell kits for single coils for Strat and for Tele and for P90s as well.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, those flat works, those 4 bond flat work for the bobbins, those are either water jet or laser cut. They're very accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've only heard good things about those kits. You can also, of course, on StewMac or Mojotone, assemble your own kits so that you're doing your own bobbin types and colors and screw and slug colors and things like that. It's yeah, all of those companies are selling good good products. As
Yeah.
far as a style of pickup that's easier or harder to start with, um, I don't know. For me, it's whether a pickup is easy or challenging. It comes down to the wire. Just learning to
Mm-hmm.
deal with this hair thin wire
Mm-hmm.
um, and learning to solder it correctly without just burning it right off.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Learning to solder your start and your finish leads. Um, that's kind of a bit of a learning curve right there. And then so I guess then you go back to, okay, so what kind of pickup is easier or harder? Single coil, you you have to solder
Uh-huh.
one start and one finish, and then you're done.
Yeah.
For a humbucker, you do it 2 times. But in terms of laying the wire down, it's not any more. Um, and difficult or easy. Just I guess maybe also the total number of components could be an issue. Um, a single coil, it's pretty simple to put together. Not a whole lot of components. It's mostly, the magnets are they are the core. They are you're just attaching the flanges to the magnets, and then the base plate. With a humbucker, you've got the bobbins, you've got the slugs, you've got the screws, you got the keeper, you've got the spacers, you've got the magnet, you got the base plate, and all of that is kind of this little juggling act that you're trying to do, while at the same time not accidentally yanking on a lead and snapping it off and ruining your coil or something like that. So there is some very, very fine motor skill that is used in the assembly of these pickups. Again, just dealing with the wire, 42 gauge wire is hair thinner. 43 gauge wire, it's like you can almost not feel it on your fingers, especially if you're already doing woodwork and your fingers and your hands are kind of calloused. It's like, I find myself having to look really hard, just like, am I actually holding this stuff? Where did it go? It's so thin, it's almost invisible. That's where I found the most challenge, is dealing with the wire.
I would agree on that. From Instagram, Sanghuk Cho asks, any standard rule of thumb for winding, wire thickness, magnet strength, etc. Would love to get some backstories on the famous pickup tones as well.
I think we talked earlier about the most important parts of pickup winding, standard rules of thumb, and I think you gave some really good advice too there. Just like, know what you're shooting for, kind of research the manufacturing techniques on that, and then as far as having some targets for wind count, having some ideas about what kind of magnets you want to use. And then deciding if you want to go down the rabbit hole of pickup winding and doing some experimentation with adjusting some of those parameters a little by little. As far as backstories on famous pickup tones, that's there's, from what I've read, there's a lot of mythology around that, and a lot of people try to attribute some things, like some of the forums that I'm on and some of the forum discussions I've read. There are people talking about researching the exact metal steel alloy of the screws, and making sure that is, and I don't know. I don't know if there are people who said they can hear it, and I'm going to believe them when they say they can. I've never heard of any double-blind tests where people were able to say, yeah, that's different than that, and I know that the only thing that's different is the alloy and the screws. I don't know, but a lot of it, when it comes to all parts of manufacturing of some of the sort of what are considered the hallmarks of electric guitars, the early Fenders, early Gibsons, a lot of the decisions they made were based on just simple manufacturing considerations. What is the best and sometimes the cheapest material that we can get at the time? And different, people go back and reverse engineer things and find that there are different eras, different batches of things that, whether it comes to the wood or the finish, or the materials, or any of the particular suppliers that changed up in the middle of a run or something like that. So sometimes it was by accident.
It's born out of necessity. I think a lot, and really born out of just like a spirit of American manufacturing. And it wasn't so much that those manufacturers had things like real targets in mind in terms of tone. It's not like pickup manufacturers today where they're giving you these very, very descriptive paragraphs about what their product is going to sound like. It was here, we're building this guitar with
these pickups in it, and at first it was just one kind of pickup, and
Yeah.
those pickups faced the same types of variables in manufacturing consistency and quality that any widget does. And it wasn't so much that it was the product that was creating a particular tone, it was the people who played those guitars.
Mm-hmm.
So when Hendrix played a Strat,
Yeah.
when Jimmy Page played a Les Paul, it wasn't because they were, maybe they went through a handful of instruments until they found the best one that they liked and got the they thought was the best tone coming out of that particular product. But it was what they did after that. It was the music that they made. It was the style that they played in. It was all of these things downstream in their signal chain, their pedals, their amps, just even the recording process of those albums that really solidified in people's minds and souls the particular sound coming from those instruments. And there's a lot of people that try to reverse engineer those, and unfortunately some of the answers that they're coming up with were, yes, there were variations in manufacturing process over time that you might be able to attribute to a particular era or particular sound, but you also find out that some of that stuff was just by accident. And it's really kind of sometimes unfortunate to come to that conclusion, like it was by accident.
One of my favorite stories along the lines of that was that I apparently when Seth Lover first came up with the classic PAF style humbucker for Gibson, he initially had 2 slug side bobbins with the bar magnet underneath, and the pickup was completely covered over. There was no pull pieces. But one of the suits at Gibson said, "Nah, man, that needs to be adjustable. People like adjusting things."
Right.
So Seth Lever, they added the screw side bobbin, and they put those screws coming through on the one side of the pickup so that you could adjust those heights. But Seth Lever never thought that was necessary. He never he didn't think that you had to do that at all. As far as he was concerned, adding those screws was completely pointless. But that became the famous PAF humbucker.
Right. Yeah, and that's when you look at the evolution of any product, and you look at like, why was this decision made? Sometimes it's because the folks around the boardroom said, "Hey, I like this," or "Hey, what about this?" And they're like, "Okay, doesn't completely ruin the product, so I suppose we can do that."
Now it's adjustable.
Yeah, it's adjustable. But when it comes to like really seeking out tones and things like that, and educating yourself, there are some things that you can do. I mean, aside from just simply trying to play as much as possible, though you may not be able to come in contact with a lot of vintage instruments to really get up close and personal with some of those sounds. I found a couple cool resources on the interwebs. So again, our local friends, the Doug and Pat show. If you guys haven't seen this, it's awesome. It's these 2 guys in Portland, DougandPatShow.com, and I think it's Pat that is a collector. He's a collector of vintage guitars, mostly Gibsons and amps, Gibson guitars, Fender amps, and he's absolutely just got this. It's like a museum of this amazing instruments, of amazing examples, and then Doug is the guitar player, the really good guitar player, and he's played with some local groups around Portland. But what they do is they do these great shows where they do all these amp A/B tests, playing Gibson Gold Top 50s Gold Top through these different amps and A/Bing them. They've also done some pickup examples from pickup winders. I think Roadhouse has some pickups that are featured in one of their episodes there. And they just make some general commentary based on their knowledge of these vintage instruments. And and comparisons of tones. Of course, you're talking about trying to learn anything through listening through YouTube, but I found that if you listen to a whole episode and you really listen to the ABs and all that kind of stuff, and you got some good headphones on or something like that. I used to listen to a lot of these episodes when I was waiting for my daughter at ballet class. I'd sit in the car and wait, and I'd plug into the stereo system and turn it up as high as I could, to just saturate myself with sound and really be able to listen and hear these comparisons. But they do some, their show it's funny. There's a lot of just sort of BSing and stuff like that. But they do some good comparisons. I really like what they're doing. Also, I found on YouTube a while ago, it's through Seymour Duncan, guitarist Keith Merrow does this rather long, I think it's like 16 or 17 minutes long video with 15 different bridge pickups. And it's just like, I think it's just slightly more than a minute clips of each. And it's the same riff, same sort of proggy metal riff. And I think it's kind of cool. But if you can sit through it for that long and listen to all of these pickups, you start to really hear some differences. And then, so what I did was put some good headphones on. I got one window up of the Keith Merrow pickup shootout. I've got another window up of Seymour Duncan's website, and I'm going through, and every time a pickup comes along, I'm clicking on that and I'm looking at the specs, and I'm going, oh, this one has L nickel 5. And then I'm taking notes, right? And then here's another pickup. What? Well, that one sounds cool. What does that have? Go back and like, oh, that's also L nickel 5, but it's got higher DCR. Okay. And so you start making these.
Yeah.
It's hard to know what a pickup's going to sound like in your own guitar. And some people might even say it's impossible to go from some sort of demo recording or description or something like that and know exactly what it's going to sound like in your guitar. But when you're able to do all these A, B, and in this case A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, A, comparisons of all these pickups, you start to get some general understandings of what makes them tick in terms of wire count and magnet type. It's and that's when you start really going, oh, okay. You don't have to play, all these guitars with these pickups mounted in them. You can make some generalizations about tone, and can kind of steer you in some directions, and maybe aim for a particular recipe that you want to try out. Yeah. Which kind of brings us into one of our last questions here,
which is from Andy Bagley from Instagram. Yes. Asks, how do you plan for a pickup wind / design? What makes winding your own stand out compared to buying something from Bare Knuckle, Seymour Duncan, etc.? What can you do to make your own pickup stand out and be unique compared to commercial brands?
For that first part, how do you plan for a pickup wind? I think I just kind of said it, and that is, I go from what I've learned from listening to different pickups, either in person or in some of these pickup comparisons that I've listened to on the webs. For example, going back to the start of the show, I mentioned this 8-string that is getting a 5-way switch. That pickup is wound super hot. It's wound to just shy of 16K, and it has ceramic 8 magnets in it. It's going to be absolutely dripping, saturated. Just like, it's going to be ridiculous. And why did I choose that wind count? Why did I choose that magnet type? And it was actually because listening to this Seymour Duncan pickup shootout with Keith Merrow, Seymour Duncan has a pickup that's called the Nazgul, which is, if you think about what the Nazgul is, and it's
mean sounding name.
Yeah, right. And I was like, oh my God, I love that sound in that particular context,
Yeah.
And so I looked up the specs, and I'm like, I'm gonna see what that sounds like. So for me, it's just kind of like finding out like what is this going to sound like, and I was listening, at the time that I was planning for this guitar, I was also listening to a lot of metal. I was listening to Meshuggah and a lot of very, very heavy
Yeah.
sounds, and I'm just like, this could be cool. Let's find out what this is. And so, how do I plan? It's kind of like, what do I want this kind of character? Do I want this guitar to have?
Yeah.
And really going off of sort of standard recipes and the sort of the understood result that comes from these standard recipes. And of course also considering who might play it. You know, guitar I sold last year, I put some pretty middle of the road pickups. Not to say that they're boring, but they're to fairly vintage specs. They're wound to 5,000 turns, so somewhere in the range of 7 to 8K. Alnico 5 magnets, and they're very utilitarian. They're very kind of just like, they're a crowd pleaser. It's not necessarily super hot. It's not it's not wound lower for a little bit cleaner sound. It's a very utilitarian pickup, and I knew that's what the owner was going to need. So there's a lot of considerations. Sometimes it's just because you're like, what's this going to sound like? That'd be cool.
Yeah.
And I know, Paul, you're thinking about this stuff too, because as you're prototyping Danger Brand guitars, and you're thinking about what to put under the hood. What are your considerations for that?
Well, so my immediate sort of first instinct on it is to just go for the tone that I like, which is a fairly big sounding pickup, a pretty kind of a wide open thing. As I've sort of said before, I think I might have spoke to this a little bit on a previous episode of the show, just about how, we're doing all of our pickups through Ken at Roadhouse, and we're going to be developing some sort of standard model stuff. And then, when people say, hey, can I get this? Can I get that? Want something different? We just kind of, we utilize Ken's expertise to kind of whip something up that is hopefully going to, nail the tone that people are after. But, my initial first offering pickup that we're going to go for is just this sort of medium output humbucker. Very, very, so a little brighter than your standard PAF humbucker, because it's kind of the expectation these days that you don't have a lot of excessive noise. People don't like single coil noise. And I like a big sounding pickup. I want something, I also kind of specified, hey, I like to tune down. And I want a pickup that sounds fantastic in standard tuning, but I want to be able to tune down, go to heavier strings, and get that extra meat out of it. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the specifications that I gave Ken. I told him, beyond that, I don't care how you make the thing. I don't care if it's rod magnets, a bar magnet, like the size format that we're working with is bigger than a standard humbucker.
Okay.
When we're making our own pickup covers and stuff. So it's very much like, should be able to fit just about anything in there, And so I don't actually know what it's going to look like, going to sound exactly like yet, or how he's going to make it. But I've given him the information, and I'm just letting the expert do his thing.
That's cool.
But that's those are the basic considerations for the sort of initial offering, and then we'll develop models, variations, and such. After that, once we kind of get some market foothold with the initial idea.
That's cool. It's really cool that you have someone like Ken helping you out with that, and just that consideration alone, the a pickup having the potential to handle a variety of tunings, um, and and having the know-how to say, okay, if we're gonna tune down, what does that mean? Does that mean that we have a slightly floppier string with a little bit more string excursion in terms of its travel every time you pick it? How does that translate into to tone, and how does a pickup read that? So to have the knowledge to be able to make a design choice based on something like that, that's really cool. That's really cool.
Yeah, I'm excited about it, and I'm really looking forward to getting some prototypes in and putting them through their paces.
Right.
But yeah, I think design considerations really just come down to what's the sound you want to get out of it. I would also say, to kind of speak to some of the rest of this question with compare your pickups to the commercial brands and what can you do to make them unique.
Yeah.
Tonally, I think there are still things that people can do. There probably are unexplored tonal regions, but I would say that maybe more than that, things that you could do to be unique would just be the aesthetics of the pickup. Make it look different. How can you come up with a cool pickup shape? How can you do pickups with a cool material? You see some of these guys do these cool things where they'll take like those nickel beauty rings and they'll like blow torch them to turn into like blue and purple colors and stuff. And it's just kind of like, it becomes this thing of like, well, tonally speaking, there's a lot that you can do with a pickup because every little component can change the sound, and you can experiment with all that stuff and dial in the tone that you want. But just because you don't have to stop there, you don't have to stop with just that. And I think a lot of companies have made their name. I think like McNelly Pickups is a good example of that. I know Florian from Millimetric Instruments has his unique pickup aesthetic. And I think
Michael King, Calbrand.
Absolutely, Michael King. You're doing some cool stuff with your pickup covers and shapes I've seen. So, I think a lot of it can come down to like, you can wind a very standard humbucker, single coil, whatever, or you can wind something that's a really weird thing. You can use pre-made bobbins, you can make your own bobbins, but how you dress it up after that can really make a huge difference in what's going to set you apart and what's going to make people kind of take note of your work.
Yeah, I'm glad you spoke to the aesthetics of the pickup, because I mean that definitely is a consideration. I mean, obviously it was my first consideration, and the reason that I got into pickup winding is because I wanted those pickups to be angled and to follow the flow of the multi-scale, just from the nut through the frets into the pickups into the bridge. That visually needed to connect for me, which sent me down that road. And that first set of pickups, they're also they're blades. So you've got these frets going into these blades, so just again visually it all connects together. Because I'm glad you said all that, because my answer was going to be a little bit more pessimistic, and that is I really like me comparing standing up with bare knuckle with Seymour Duncan. I can't compare with the consistency of their product, with the technology that they have, just the number of units they've put out there. Can I wind something to the same recipe that they are? Yeah. Is it possible that it's going to sound similar? Yes, but and also getting back to that question about whether or not you'd want to make pickups something that is another product line that you offer as a builder. It's like, no, I couldn't compete in terms of price and in terms of consistency. But that's not what it's all about. When you're winding your own pickups, it's to have that customization, that ability to not have to go through a catalog and say like, what do I want? What do I want? What do I want? But rather to think about, what what the sounds are that you've achieved in the past, and how to nudge them one way or another, and making it part of the whole package, the whole package of a boutique and bespoke instrument. I think, and I hope that that customers respond positively to that. I know that just in guitar shows, I oftentimes bring my winder and set it out for display. And sometimes people are like, "Well, these guitars are cool. Whoa, what the hell is that?" and
Yeah.
and when I tell them that, like, really, how, what? And then sometimes they actually realize, like, what's actually in a pickup? What's actually, like, how does that work? And then I show them a bare bobbin, I show them a wound bobbin, I show them the magnet wire, on a spool. They're just like, wow, that's really, I didn't know anything about that. That's really cool. I'm hoping it plays into the whole package, that is that, again, that custom bespoke instrument, and to show your customer that you have been paying close attention to every detail that you possibly can. And then some people really like that. When it comes to this whole topic of pickups and various recipes and various other manufacturers, suppliers that you can get them from, really what it comes down to is, how much does it matter? It's just kind of a penny, when it comes down to those subtle things that we've been talking about, when you put 3 to 4 pedals, and 15 foot or longer cable and into an amp or something like that, where does that subtlety go?
I like the nihilistic streak in you, Jason. That's what does it matter? Who cares anymore? No, yeah, I mean, it's funny because it is kind of funny though when you bring it up, because you talk about like an acoustic guitar is one of those things where it's like, gosh, like,
it's raw.
The tone of an acoustic guitar is really coming from the guitar itself. Yeah. It's the air pump, it's the whole thing. An electric guitar, so much of the sound comes from the pickups. And sometimes body wood and other things they're there and they matter, but I mean, geez, that pickup is such a huge part of things. But again, then everybody just plugs it into all these amplifiers and pedals and all this other stuff. Yeah. And so it's kind of like, sometimes just get a sound, get something to come out of the thing and work with it. I mean, I know people who they're amp guys. They have their one guitar, but they have all these amps. They're really into amps. And for me, it's kind of the other way around. I'm a guitar guy, and I'm just happy with one amp, because I feel like any amp I plug into, I can get a sound that I like. But am I going to enjoy playing it? Because there's only one thing I'm actually touching at all times. And that's the guitar. Yeah. The guitar is the tactile thing that is in your hands at all times. Right. So I always want that guitar to feel right and to feel like, comfortable to my body. But the sound coming out of it, no matter what, whether it's a super junky sound or a super hi-fi, pristine, perfect sound, I'm going to be able to work with it. Yeah. I'm going to be able to find some way to manipulate this sound and with my playing style that I'm going to enjoy. It's if I've got sharp fret ends, well, that's a deal breaker,
Yeah.
So,
context,
how much does it really?
Such a part, and just like volume level. Yeah. Are you playing at bedroom levels?
Yeah, there you go.
Or are you playing at club levels or stadium levels?
Yeah, geez.
And then are you playing on stage with the amp directly behind you, or are you doing some sort of direct input to the house? Are you playing a pretty simple setup, or are you like the Edge and you've got like 2 refrigerator size racks that you're plugging through that
in-ear monitors versus the wedges up front?
Right. So does all this stuff matter? Of course it does. Kinda. All right, thanks, folks, for sticking with us for 2 weeks of shows here on the electronics topic. We really hope that you got some good stuff out of this. Hopefully, it helped you understand your own guitars better, whatever you already have on the rack, and maybe your plans going into your next build and how you want to outfit your instruments with your own custom electronics or with whatever components you decide to throw in there. Hopefully you have a little bit better understanding of how all those different things contribute to the tone that results and the sound that you're going for.
Yeah, and hey, guys, have some fun with it. Experiment a little. I hope that maybe this got some people over the ledge as far as just getting over any of maybe some of the initial fears or jitters that people sometimes have about getting into these things. It's a big topic, obviously. It took us 2 weeks to get through it. But, it's fun. I mean, some of this stuff is really cool, and, you can really make such a huge difference in the way your guitar sounds with just even simple little changes. Just get your soldering technique down and go for it.
Right. Once you get comfortable with it, it very much becomes an empowering sort of thing. You feel like it's not just about, a string gauge and setup and intonation and stuff like that. It really makes you feel like you can dive into the inner workings of your instrument and really affect some results.
Absolutely. So with that, I think we are done for this week. Thank you for listening to the Luthiers podcast. We appreciate you and your support, and hang in there until next week. Thank you so much. Okay, bye.